I'm very pleased that we're getting back together again as a group this afternoon. This morning it was very interesting to me because as I moved from each of these table discussions, I got the sense that many of you have the same issues. You know, there are differences and distinctions, of course, between your companies and the populations that you work with, but overall there were general themes that seemed to be overriding. And I think we've done a very good job of identifying issues, many of the issues that you face. We've had the big picture this morning. So this afternoon, our role here, what we'd like to share is the view from the field, how a couple of companies have really started addressing those issues. A best practice sharing, if you will, or raising of thoughts for you in terms of what you might do in your organizations. And for our folks who are going to share all their information with you, I'm very pleased that Holly and Maria are with us. Holly Fowler is the Senior Director of Product and Brand Development for Prestige Care. She brings a lot of experience because Prestige Care is working along the continuum, independent, assisted living, as well as skilled nursing. So really looking at that. Another interesting point is that Holly is joining us. Before she joined Prestige Care, she was working for technology companies in terms of product development. So bringing a very strong background to us in that regard. Maria Connolly, many of you probably already know, is now the president of the Wellness Edge, an independent company working on not only programming, wellness programming, but also the implementation of that programming, because she brings a lot of experience in that realm through her various roles, most recently with Kisco Senior Living and now with her own company. And you can read a lot more in this handy dandy booklet about them. So Holly, I'm going to start with you. In your perspective, what kind of digital technologies are being used now in senior living? What are people utilizing in their organizations?
Well, technology really impacts every aspect of our business, whether it's an enterprise system or back office support, whether it's care provision or electronic records, and also technology for use with our residents for wellness programs and those types of things. So it's really interesting, depending on who you talk to, what systems they would discuss. You know, from a back office and corporate perspective, obviously we're using all of the financial systems, the HR systems, the marketing automation, CRM systems, all of those. But those don't impact our residents as much. From a resident perspective, we're slow on the technology. I, as you know, come from high tech, and so I'm an early adopter. And I learned very quickly when I moved into this industry that it is not an early adopter industry in any way, shape, or form. And so while we're doing certain things from a technological perspective with our residents and with our staff, it is nowhere near what we could be doing. We do some things along wellness programming. We have cognitive stimulation programs. We've got some fall reduction and fall prevention programs. We have some engagement systems, Link Senior, which I think is similar in a certain way to some of the presentations here, but not as much as we could be doing at the building level.
You mentioned several technologies just now at the building level with the residents. Has it worked? I mean, if you use cognitive stimulation, has it helped their cognition? If you use any other kind of wellness program, has it been successful? How do you know if it has or hasn't?
We are just starting with those two programs in particular. We just did a product release late last year, and we're rolling it out to additional communities this year. So we're in the early measurement phase. I can tell you that anecdotally we are seeing improvements. Our cognitive stimulation program has been amazing. We've seen people progress in the assessments. We're seeing people that are more engaged, more active, have a better sense of belonging than they did, especially with some of our memory care residents. So yes, we are seeing that. Fall reduction and fall prevention, we're just starting. So it's early. We're not going to see that for several months, if even longer than that. But we are seeing it definitely in the cognitive stimulation area.
It's interesting, isn't it, that they are. So Maria, you've mentioned to me, and many of these folks have, that there's so many technologies, so many companies are coming and knocking on the doors in senior living. What are some key issues for evaluating all that equipment when they come knocking on your door?
Sounds good. Well, first of all, it's really important. I wanted to share with all of you that, and I don't know if it's a trend, if it's going to happen in more communities, but in companies I've been talking to, there is a focus about keeping on top of technology, and a couple of corporations have established either a wellness innovation forum where they monitor new technology, emerging technology, and then also either individual or under operations or IT. And so the question comes up, is that something that we need in the marketplace, is more attention on all this evolving technology, and who in a community or corporate home office owns it? So that's number one. What I look for in evaluation is, number one is, what is the potential of that technology? Will it meet the immediate need? So what is that potential for the immediate need? Number two, what has the most promise for the clientele we're serving, the older adult, or also it could apply to the employee? Then I have like a list of questions that I look at and considerations. Web-based. Does the current system we have, is that able to talk to the new technology? So web-based is extremely important. Do they interact and talk to each other? Number two, what about usability? Is it user-friendly? Is it easy to learn? Is key. Third is, what about evaluation and monitoring? Does the system, does that new technology have inbuilt tools to monitor? Next is, what about security? And we talked about that earlier today. How is the data protected? Who has access? And who will be able to utilize that data? And there's just a lot of conflicting information about having access to certain data that has brought a lot of issues to communities. And then last but not least is the usability, the user interface. Because if we don't have if we as line staff are not able to understand the program, the flow of information from screen to screen is not easy to read. It's all cluttered, it's complicated. We are not going to have the buy-in from our staff. So those are the key features that I look for when I evaluate. And again, emphasizing this is prior to the pilot. Because in a pilot, which I really support doing pilots, I think they're extremely important, but it's very important when you meet with the vendor that you identify the goal and the objective, and what are you going to measure. Sometimes that gets forgotten, and it's really important, because how can you decide if it's a successful pilot if you don't have how you're going to measure the success of the program?
Well, those are a lot of good key points that you've just mentioned. You know, Holly, Maria said web-based. What are the issues surrounding infrastructure? We have older buildings, newer buildings, wired, wireless, all these kind of situations.
That is a big challenge for us. We have quite a few older plants, and it's expensive to bring technology into them, whether it be wireless. In many of our communities, if you're within maybe 30, 40 feet of the reception desk, then you have great connectivity, but the second you go down a hall or go to a residence room or an activity center, you don't have it. And so it's very, very difficult for us to bring new technology in without a pretty big investment in the infrastructure to do that. Our employees our frontline staff do not use computers. They don't even have emails in many situations. So it's hard to reach them. It's hard to provide information for them. Again, it's really centralized around that office and administrative staff, not so much reaching into our community. So it's a big challenge for us. We have not been able to do several of the things that we'd like to do. For example, we tried to roll out Skype and FaceTime. And again, it worked great if you were in the dining room or somewhere that was close, but it wasn't very feasible for many of our residents in their apartments. So it was frustrating because we felt like they could come and do it if we were working with them, but they couldn't do it in the comfort of their own apartment. So we run into a lot of challenges from that standpoint. Bandwidth is another one that's very, very difficult. So even if you do have connectivity, it's slow as molasses, and people get frustrated and don't want to do anything with it. So it has not been an easy challenge for us.
Do you get the sense that communities, as they add on, develop, refresh, they might start adding more of the infrastructure, more of the wiring?
We do, but again, there's a lot of investment required to refurb and update those buildings. We have 80 communities, and I would say probably half of them are newer or refurbed and half of them are not. And so not only does it take time and resources to refurb, it takes an investment to do it. So yes, we're getting there slowly but surely, but by the time we get them all refurbed, then it's going to be time to start all over to adopt new technology that comes in.
Yeah, when I was at Kisco, we had the same issue,
Yeah.
is how do you address when you've acquired a number of communities that are aging 30 years plus,
Yeah.
and the cost factor was always a challenge.
Huge.
So we have telephones. We might all have telephones of some level or another. And then you have data management and cloud-based data storage systems. There's a wide variety. So Maria, what do you look at when you're trying to integrate new technology with what you already have? You mentioned that earlier. How does it integrate? But technology is a huge word.
It is. And I always have the philosophy, I always say keys to a successful integration is keys to a successful technology implementation, because you've got to have the framework. And in talking to a number of companies, and I know when I was at Kisco, this is something that we were looking at, is looking at a database method that would store all the data in a single database, and that we could then have it be completely integrated. And so we're, at that time, they were looking at an enterprise resource planning method, and that would integrate all the data in one single database, and it would talk to each other. And then you would be able to integrate all the different functions in all areas of the organization and connect the different modules to each other. And so that is something that we were looking at, and they have started to implement enterprise resources planning, EPR. And I've talked to a number of companies who are moving in that direction, because then it helps reduce this whole issue about buy or customize. And really, if you use that, you don't have to worry about that. But I think the other piece that I'd like to mention is that technology needs to be adaptable to the organizational's needs. And so the technology needs to adapt to the ever-changing needs of our community. And when you put in new technology, that it can't just be left there. It needs to be evaluated and monitored for its strengths and weaknesses. So there's no easy answer to that, but I have found in talking to companies, this single database method could really help bring all the data together in one area, and then you can grow with it.
And then you could grow with it, important. You know, Holly, what about return on investment? You've both talked about the investment in infrastructure, building a whole new database, centralized data. That's a lot. How do you measure return on investment? And I'm going to ask a part two to that question. Is that from the users, the wellness staff view, the residents view, the CFO's view, the company, the technology view?
Well, I'm going to answer the second part first. The COO and the CFO hold the money, right? So when building a return on investment, that's something I had to learn to do early on, because again, not early adopters, risk adverse, understandably so, focused on caring for our residents, not necessarily looking outside of that. So early on, when we did our first product release, which was our memory care product, I had to build an ROI because I asked for a large investment, and I will never forget our CFO's jaw literally dropped when I told him how much I wanted to invest in this. And he basically told me I was crazy. we're great friends now. We worked through that, and he's been much nicer to me ever since we showed the return on investment. So the things that I look at when I'm building an ROI, it really depends on the type of project that you're trying to implement. So it might be something that's going to drive census. There's a clear investment. They get that, right? You increase census, as long as your rates are comparable or higher, you're going to increase your profit. Length of stay is a new one that we've been looking at for cognitive stimulation and fall reduction programs. Again, not something that they necessarily were thinking about in terms, but very easy to quantify and put a dollar value to. If you have an average length of stay of 22 months and you can extend it by 7 months, that's a pretty viable option for showing the return on investment. We look at customer satisfaction results. I know there's a lot of data out there that says if you increase your customer satisfaction rating by X%, you're going to see X% return in revenue. I think that sounds great. In my experience, it's really hard to prove that. So I would call that more of a soft ROI. Anecdotally, we know that it should improve, but it's very difficult to quantify and assign a dollar value to that. Staff efficiency is another thing that I look at when we're building an ROI. If it's something that can reduce the number of hours or allow us to do more with the same number of staff, that again is something that is very, very easy to quantify. So I always build an ROI and a strong business case, and then I make sure that we make it. So I always build a conservative one because that's the only way that I can get investment. It's not that people don't believe it's the right thing to do, it's just that the reality is we have to figure out how to fund this. And we have a lot of conflicting priorities that require budget. So ROI is something I live and breathe more than I want to, but it's a reality of life.
I suspect. So you have the infrastructure, you've made your business case. What about the staffing? Maria, what are you looking at when you have staffing? Is it hiring people? Is it training them? What if your staff don't like that technology?
Well, it's a very good question, and when I saw that question, I started asking myself is, let's see, in communities, in some of the communities, when we look at hiring somebody, we have not really, in some communities, have not done any technical skill-based testing for the line staff. We have done it for the corporate office or for the community management team. And I think what that paradigm is going to need to change because I really do believe we're going to need to look at what the expectation is for our line staff, because technology is in every transaction we're doing now. And also not just in processes and transactions, but families have expectations about getting more information about their loved one more immediately and having those kind of tools available. So I really believe that as an industry, you know, we can't sit there and expect right now, like for example, our caregivers to have those skill sets right off the bat. So I think we're going to have to look at how we do training and really have more of a dedicated technology training curriculum for our existing associates so they can focus on some of the basics and deciding what that baseline should be. And I think it can be done very positive, because if you can help show the benefit of the training, how it's going to make their job more productive, how they can complete their tasks in a timely basis, then they're going to be more open, and they're not going to fear that the technology is going to replace them. And then they'll be more open. Plus, if you do like peer training, have those that do have that technical skills, who are their peers, to have them do the training themselves. So, but I am a believer in answering the question that we are going to need to look at, for new associates and for existing associates, a beefed up curriculum for technology. We do a great job in training on compliance, on care management models, etc., but we've got to look at now technology.
In your experience, do technology companies offer training, or short-term, immediately I install it, here's how to use it, I'm gone, or do they have a long-term curriculums? How do they do?
It's a mix. It's a mix. I think where the shortfall is that sometimes some of these companies really don't understand the diversity and multicultural staff that we have. And so they underestimate that, and they look at one type of training. We need to have we need online training, face-to-face training. We need how do you message it and keep it up front. How do you do short-term training so the knowledge is fresh and that you don't have a gap? Because once somebody uses those skills, if they're not using them immediately, they're going to lose that. So I have seen really a mix. Some do a very good job, but that's with a lot of really having them understand the profile of our employee base.
That's a very good point. Holly, in memory care and thinking about assisted living, how does technology impact those staff members?
It's mixed, to be honest. I think some of the online systems that we have, some of them embrace it and others don't. Some feel that it's a way to enhance the care that we give. Others feel like it's another step and more things that they have to do when they're already really, really busy. So we've had mixed results, quite frankly, bringing new technology in at that level. You know, some people are really energetic about it, and they're great, and some just don't really want to embrace it at all. A lot of it has to do with how we roll it out and how we implement it. I think training, as you mentioned, is huge. I think it's really, really easy to roll it out and just assume everybody's going to be as excited about it as we are, and that they're going to jump right on that and dedicate the time. I think that's a little bit in the clouds because it doesn't always work that way. I don't think we always give our staff the hours, quite frankly, to do the training. So a lot of times we'll roll something out and then we'll find out people haven't attended the training, and we'll find out why. Well, we didn't have the hours, or we were understaffed, or we were short. So it's really difficult. I think that we need to look at it holistically and provide what we need to provide for it to be successful for them to engage with it.
Would it be successful if people learned the technology in those care situations assisted? Would it make their jobs easier?
It would.
Would it make it better for them?
It would. They're just not always convinced of that. And so
that makes sense.
Yeah, they don't always see it that way. And while I think it's really helpful to sit down and say this is the benefit, sometimes they engage with that and sometimes they don't. So it's difficult.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Maria, you've done so much evaluation, and it sounds like you've talked to quite a lot of companies. What's some advice you would give to technology companies that would help them better reach this marketplace or answer the questions that you need answered?
Well, number one, they need to understand our business. And I think we talked about that earlier. How do you provide the technology if you haven't done your homework? And I know we had an experience when I was at Kisco with IDEO out of San Francisco. And for them to understand us, they came to one of our communities, and they stayed a couple of days at the community and had breakfast. They participated in classes and programs because they wanted to understand what it's like to live in a community. So I think number one that I would say to technology partners that they need to understand our audience, who we serve. Number two, also on the employee side is extremely important, again, about the diversity and multicultural, because that's going to tie into the training program, which is key. And then I know from my experience, I have struggled a little bit with some vendors about how we're going to measure the pilot phase. What are the measurements so we can then turn around and be able to build the ROI? And some technology companies have had a hard time with that. So I think that would really help. And then I think, too, them understanding our culture and our mission is extremely important, too.
Very interesting. Holly, I'm going to ask you the same question. If you had a few recommendations, what would they be?
Maria did such a good job. She's a hard act to follow on that. I would say the same things. I think the vendors that are present today do understand our business. I can tell you from the amount of sales calls that I get, 90% of the people that contact us for solutions are looking at our market as a huge growth area and have no clue what we do. And so that is really frustrating, where they want us to take their technology and adapt it for our use, which I'm not going to do. I don't have the time to do that, nor does it make sense. So I think understanding our market, I would concur with you. That's a huge opportunity. It's one, quite frankly, that's surprising to me. Having come from high tech, we didn't develop anything that we didn't understand the market, but apparently there are a lot of companies out there that aren't quite there yet. Obviously for me, ROI is a big deal. And so if they can help me build an ROI case, that makes it much easier for me to do the internal sales job of trying to get justification to bring a new system in. A lot of them are not necessarily understanding that ROI. In fact, I had a conversation with a vendor the other day, and I mentioned census, and he didn't even know what that was. And that's fine. I mean, that's great. I wouldn't expect him to, except if you're going to have a conversation with myself or with someone, you better be able to show how it ties back to being able to provide better care or better financials or whatever that might be. So those would be my two big ones, I think, that I would say if you're coming in to talk, make sure you understand what we're trying to accomplish and make sure that you're not trying to force fit, and make sure that you can help us internally sell it.
And I will want to remind everybody that the fishbowl is now open. There's a couple of chairs here. If anyone wants to bring their own questions or comments, you're very welcome to. Maria, what about the residents? We've talked a lot about the staffing, the infrastructure, but what about the residents? What technologies appeal to them or don't appeal to them?
Well, I'm going to be very pragmatic. If I'm a resident, I'm saying, does it make sense to me? And if it makes sense to me, then I'm going to be more open to using it and seeing the benefits. And I'm a believer that future technology and technology now is going to be driven by the seniors. They're going to tell us what they need. And so what we're seeing as easily adopted right now are ones that relate to assisted daily living activities, that helping them navigate their everyday activities, all the way to grooming, to answering the door. And so we have seen the tablet-based products that have been really great. One that we piloted at Kisco was K4 Connect. It was excellent for people who had chronic disease management. One case was Parkinson's. And so, I mean, just getting up to answer his door was a chore for him. And so everything is on the tablet and just touch. And that would open the door, answer the phone. And so it made his life, it allowed him to still stay in an independent living, but using those type of devices. So I think those are easily adoptable. The music programs, the brain fitness programs, I know for the wellness, we have been easily adopted. They have not been very complicated. I think the only challenge is we did a music program where it was all Apple-based. And of course, at Kisco, we didn't support, the IT department did not support Apple-based products. So we then did depend on the vendor that if there were issues, that we would get that support. But I would say those would be the early adopters for technology that were easily implemented.
And you mentioned the tablet.
Yes.
That was the device.
Yes, the tablet, the iPods, music and memories. Easily adaptable.
Please, go ahead.
Do you think that the seniors are standoffish, are scared of the technology because we don't do a good enough job explaining the product or the benefits for that?
Yes, yes. I think it goes both ways. I think we need to do a better job of helping them understand what the benefits are. And that comes to when you do a pilot. I'm a believer that you have a champion at the community. If it's the executive director, which is great, they're championing. But they've got to convey that confidence and the benefits to the residents who are going to participate in the pilot. So once the residents, we have found, once they understand the benefits, like on K4 Connect, we had immediately 45 residents sign up to participate in the pilot because they saw and understood the benefits. But we took the time to really help them understand the program.
Holly, have you had experience that could relate?
A
to
little
this
bit,
question?
yeah. I think I agree with what you said about them seeing the benefit in it. I think if they're interested in it, they'll engage with it. Have you seen the documentary called Alive Inside? Anybody here? It's an amazing documentary that talks about how people with memory care issues can connect with music and how it really brings them alive. And we did a similar pilot in our communities, and it was amazing to see what it did. But again, we spent a lot of time not necessarily educating our residents, because they were our memory care residents, but their families. And then we watched and saw what happened with that. And it's just amazing how they engaged with that. Cognitive stimulation, brain games, those types of things, we've had good engagement with those as well, because they see the benefit for them. And I'm seeing a little bit of that as we're starting to roll out our fall prevention. We pre-launch any new solution to our residents and their families. And we do that for two reasons. One, we think it's important that they understand what we're trying to do. We want to gather their feedback and make modifications based on that. We also want to create a little bit of pull-through. And what I mean by that is, if we educate our residents and their families and they're looking for something and it's not being provided by the community, which happens, we hear about it. And so it gives us an opportunity to go back in and talk with them about, okay, this is why we want to do this. You're hearing demand on that from your residents. So we've done that with fall prevention and with cognitive stimulation, and I think that's helped with the adoption, quite frankly, is to create that demand for them.
How often does your company or anybody's company out here really take the time to either meet with the executive directors or with just basically your frontline staff in finding out what they need, as opposed to a corporation making a decision because maybe it's that cool feature, it's the newest thing out on the block, we want to be the first company to have it? How much time do we put into getting that information from the people that are serving the residents?
Do you want me to tackle that?
Sure, and then I can add to it.
Okay, we spend a lot of time as part of our product development process, which is one that we started when we first did our Expressions Memory Care product. I do a cross-functional development, so I don't sit in an office or have a small team in an office and come up with wonderful things and roll it out. We do focus groups with our target audience, whether they be residents or families. We talk with our staff. We have a cross-discipline, multidiscipline development team, people from the clinical side, from the operations side, frontline, dietary, you name it. We have them in there, and they're part of coming up with the solution that we develop. So there's a much stronger buy-in when we do that. It's a much better product, quite frankly, because I don't have all the expertise that's needed to develop that. So it's a win-win for everybody. So we spend an extraordinary amount of time just making sure that it's an inclusive process, not something that we develop because it's cool and if we build it, they will come, because they don't. They need to be part of that process.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of success when it bubbles up from the community level. Absolutely, because we have seen some of the best technology be championed by a community and then implemented enterprise-wide.
Yep.
And because again, you have that champion, and you've got to have that passion, because you have to go through a number of things for getting it approved. And if you have that acceptance at the local level,
It'll happen.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
Good points.
Thank you.
You know, we have several people here who are coming to us from the IT side. I'd like to invite one or all of you to join our fishbowl. The chairs are open.
I'm Director of IT for LifeSpace Communities. We own and operate 12 CCRCs in the Midwest and in Florida, and one in Pittsburgh. And actually, I wanted to ask all of you a question. One of the challenges that I'm faced with, I have a distributed team around the country. Some of them are based at the communities. And in 2 of our communities, we actually support residential IT issues. So we go to their apartment, we fix their PC, we upgrade their operating system, help them with their internet connection, their iPad, whatever they need. And so we do that in only 2 of our communities. I'm really trying to back away from that and not offer that as a service anymore. Because what happens is it sets up a conflict when my team is trying to support the team members, at the community and they have resident tickets that are coming in, it just creates too much of a workload. So I wanted to know from those of you who are familiar with this, how many of you support resident technology issues, if at all?
Maria, did you have?
Yeah, I wanted to add, at some of the communities, they provide what we call tech services. It's become so popular because what's happening is the residents are getting the iPods, the iPads, the iPhones, and the adult child isn't always having time to help them understand how to use it. And so we kept hearing that. Residents would get this new present and they didn't know what to do with it. So they developed text services that are anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week. And it's during the day and evening they can come down, and we utilize some staff, but primarily we went to the high schools. And we got the kids who know this, and part of their community service, we tied their community service hours to helping support the tech services. So that's kind of how we integrate it.
How did you find the high school students? Did you just go to a local high school?
Go to a local high school, because all of them have community service hours, and develop that relationship. And it's landed up working perfectly, because like music and memory program, where you need to download all the music on the iPods, the students love to do that, and then they're starting to learn about asking the resident, why do you like that music, and what era did that come from?
Let me play this for you.
Let me play this for you. So now they become pals. So it's kind of worked nicely.
Okay, good, thank you.
Question for the panel, and we had dialogue today around the continuum of care. And interoperability is part and parcel to the successful continuum of care. So our residents typically come from an acute setting. And there's an EHR in the acute setting. It might be Cerner, might be McKesson. We may be running an EHR that's different. We know we don't have the interoperability, and it's not just within senior living, it's within healthcare in general.
Right.
And there's a lot of technologies we've talked about today. And again, the value proposition, I think, goes beyond just the technology itself, but how that technology can go into the care planning to achieve better outcomes for that resident. And so I'll just, I'm Mike Summers, CIO, Sunrise Senior Living, and it's one of the challenges that I'm continually faced with. And it's a big uphill battle that many of us are faced with. And, today's solution is to kind of hardwire these connections in. I look for technologies that have open system architecture, open APIs that communicate. We're trying to evolve to a standards-based way of a file specification, kind of like an HL7, to share information. But I would just suggest when you're talking to your vendors and you're trying to determine the value proposition, seriously, in your evaluation criteria, look to see if they have an open system architecture, how they share information, because chances are the information you're collecting could benefit the rest of the care planning process for those residents. But I'd be interested to hear what the panel, your opinion or point of view on this is.
We look at each other. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I think it's critical, because sometimes we've had the experience with the clinical model that it's in silos. And so they're collecting information, then wellness is collecting information, and the two don't talk to each other. And in a true care plan, they need to be more integrated together. But sometimes that happens when you do the evaluation and you don't know that that's a module that's available. Sometimes in the due diligence, it doesn't really come up. But I absolutely agree. It has to be more integrated to get the whole picture of that particular resident. And right now, we're not there yet. It's really still silo-based.
Ours is as well. We're actually looking at additional systems right now to bring in so that we can solve some of the issues, but we've put in good systems for this function and good systems for this function and another one for that function, and they don't talk. And so while we can, through some of our systems, start sharing health information, especially if a resident is going from like an assisted living, one of our assisted living to one of our skilled nursing centers, we don't necessarily have that with all of our hospitals. We have it with just a couple of hospitals, and in those it's with their proprietary system architecture. So we've had a lot of challenges with that, and it's something that as an organization we're stepping back and taking a hard look at to say, how can we do that? But even in doing that, I would say that we're not including all the functions we should in the discussion. Not everybody's at the table.
We know
Yeah.
residents' healthcare needs change over time.
They do.
And if we're starting to use wearables, they may capture a change in that individual's health that should go into the care plan, that we're not capturing. So, and until we do another assessment, we may not find out about
Right.
that.
It's
And
not real time.
It's not
It's
real
delayed
time.
time.